I appreciate everybody joining us for the fourth installment of our Spark Lecture Series. I'm Kate Swanson, Interpretation and Public Engagement Educator at the Rockwell Museum. And this is technically sort of our last regular lecture of the season. And I want to remind everyone that our next program is going to be the Blockbuster Speaker Program with Margot Lee Shutterly, author of Hidden Figures. So make sure that you're receiving our email communications to grab your tickets to that event, which will be both in person and live streamed. And that will wrap up our lecture series for 2022 already. Crazy. So make sure that you're getting our communications so you don't miss out on that opportunity. This year, through the Spark Lecture Series, we've been considering how individual perspectives, unexpected sources, and lived experiences inform the artistic process. Throughout the year, we're presenting journeys that move from inspiration to creation. Before I introduce today's talk, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that the land that the Rockwell Museum occupies is home to the Seneca people of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. At the Rockwell, we continue to experiment with the appropriate use of land acknowledgements, and we invite you to learn more about our actionable steps towards working with our Indigenous communities by referring you to the land acknowledgement page of our website, which we are linking in the chat. This afternoon, we are investigating the mutual relationship of inspiration between art and science in the international expositions, also known as World's Fairs. We love to romanticize the individual moment of invention or artistic genius or artistic inspiration, but what are those factors that are really at play to support an environment of innovation on a global scale? And our speaker this evening literally wrote the book on tonight's topic. He is Director Emeritus of the Smithsonian's Lemelson Center for the Study of Innovation and Invention, and currently adjunct professor in Johns Hopkins University Master's Program in Museum Study. Dr. Arthur Molella has written and lectured extensively on the history of invention and on the relationships between science, technology, and culture in the 20th century. His publications include World's Fairs on the Eve of War, Science, Technology, and Modernity, 1937 through 1941 from 2015, and World's Fairs in the Cold War, Science, Technology, and the Culture of Progress from 2019. He also was awarded the 2020 Leonardo da Vinci Medal of the Society for the History of Technology. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Art, and I'll have you share your screen and we'll get into that presentation.
Okay, thanks very much, Kate, for inviting me, and many thanks to the audience today. I wish I could be there in person because that's where I got a lot of family in the Binghamton and Ithaca areas. I would have loved to come up, but I'm afraid COVID prevented me from making the trip, and I guess maybe even a snowfall might have stopped this time too. I'm used to those late snowfalls up in the southern tier. So today I'm going to talk about my assignment today from Kate, which is to look at World's Fairs and their role in the intersections of art and technology. That was a very nice assignment. I want to say something preliminarily about the origins of World's Fairs. The first World's Fair was held in London in 1851, the Great Exhibition. But they grew out of trade fairs in the 18th century, 19th century across Europe. So it's an outgrowth of those. And frankly, the World's Fairs were designed to sell the Industrial Revolution, which changed ways of life drastically in Europe and in the United States as well. Work was different, life was different, production was different. And so they had to sell this to the world. It's not something that people could just take on automatically. All World's Fairs that I have looked at do tend to combine technology and culture. They see their art and technology have been the staple of World's Fairs ever since the beginning, and they still are today, though I haven't been to the most recent ones, but I'm sure they are. I feel confident about that. World's Fairs have historically been a place to showcase for technologies of the future. There's always that future cast to fairs, that they're optimistic, seeing a brighter future ahead. And so if you look at, for example, the London exhibition in 1851, Charles Goodyear introduced rubber-based plastics to the global stage. 1939, DuPont presented for the first time nylon to that World's Fair. And the Montreal Fair, which I attended as a student in 1967, featured the future and the home. At the same time, all of the World's Fairs, these were sort of invention themes. At the same time, all of them celebrated artistic expression, and basically art and technology we're seeing as opposite sides of the same coin, both equally important expressions of creativity. Oh, turned on. I was very lucky that Kate found a painting from the Rockwell collections that are related very closely to World's Fairs. And here's the painting, Two Kings, Corn and Cotton. Painter Elizabeth Remington. And that was painted specifically for the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. That was the first real American World's Fair. And it was designed to celebrate 100 years of the Declaration of Independence. Now, I'm so glad she sent this painting because it's kind of a jumping off point for me for today's talk. I was very surprised how I could use that. It's not only, I think, a very fine painting, very rich and evocative to me, but it also embodies what World's Fairs are about. That is this combination of art and technology. And if you think of the commodities, you know, king corn and king cotton, especially cotton, they were integral to the Industrial Revolution, which began in the US and in England with textiles. And in America, it was cotton textiles. And in Britain, specifically, it tended to be wool. But this painting is obviously meant to evoke the kind of industrial uses of these commodities. And that's very nice. And these are all seen as signs of great progress. World's Fairs are nothing else, are all about progress. They're about, and this is a big word for the 19th century when people talked about progress. It's almost deified. And it's largely an unquestioned value that we tend to question a lot more today than we did in those days. The 1876 fair was about defining an American identity after that identity was pretty much shattered by the Civil War, and we were still recovering from that event. The art exhibits at the fair, and they had a very generous looking building, which I'm not showing here, at the Philadelphia Centennial, because they were important because they represented a search for a genuine form of American artistic expression by way of identity. Of course, American identity was probably first and foremost tied to things like Yankee ingenuity and to invention and technology. And we have to remember that this 1876 fair was really in the heart of the Industrial Revolution, mostly the American Revolution, but the British Revolution had begun earlier and still ongoing. So the US then was the rising industrial nation. It was kind of a coming out for the US to the world about our technological prowess. Technology was really we were an age of heroic invention in that period. And for example, the inventions that debuted at the 1876 fair was Bell Telephone's first patent given that year, the quadruplex telegraph as well. Agricultural equipment was featured. The coreless steam engine, which I'll introduce you to in a moment, was also a very big item. Young Tom Edison attended this fair. He was very inspired by it. He reports trying out and looking at Alexander Graham Bell's first telephone. And this was brand new to the world. All of these meant a lot. Typewriters were featured, sewing machines were featured at that fair as well. Now, I think it's important to understand in that period as well, technology kind of merged with art. Now, this is a steam engine in the collections of the Smithsonian, my former employer. And it's a wonderful thing, but it's before the World's Fair of 1876, yes, in time for the 1851 World's Fair in London, but it wasn't there. But the main thing I want to point out here is how technology and art were merged at that period. And this lovely steam engine, I think it's gorgeous. We had it featured in one of our shows about that 1851 exhibition. It's this wonderful, what would you call this, neoclassical, classical revival kind of motif. And this was very common among some of the big technologies of that time. Even if you looked at scientific instruments then, they were very artistic looking. So art, science, and technology tend to be all mixed up together at that period. I mentioned before the coreless steam engine, and this was the icon of the fair. Think of it as the Eiffel Tower which was the icon for the World's Fair in Paris. And every fair tends to have a major icon associated with it. In 1893, the White City in Chicago, it was the Ferris wheel, for example. So they tend to be big technological artifacts. So this is the one. Now look at the scale of this thing. I mean, that always amazes me. Those are real life-size human beings by this thing. It's probably, what would you say, 40 or 50 feet tall. And it's, you know what? It's beautiful to look at, I think. It's got a great stature. It's very imposing. And of course, that was the whole purpose of it, to just wow people when they came in. So there, I just wanted to give you a sense of how technology merges with art in the general realm, not just World's Fairs, but it's something that's very common in World's Fairs. And here's one example here with the coreless steam engine. It was the state-of-the-art steam engine at that time. It went very, very fast. It was very powerful. I believe it was used to just power sawmills for the railways in that period. Okay, now we're going to switch gears, and I've got literally some gears in front of you here. Now, I could have chosen any number of technologies and pieces of art to exemplify and epitomize this relationship between technology and art in World's Fairs. But I really wanted to choose something that encapsulated these two qualities of innovation, precision, and artistry, or three qualities, I guess I'm saying, whose development also depended heavily on World's Fairs. And what jumped to my mind automatically was the mechanical watch. You're probably aware that timekeeping was essential to the Industrial Revolution. The rise of the watch was both a product and enabler of that technological revolution, really going back far in time, but especially the Industrial Revolution of the 18th and 19th centuries. It was critical to time-based technologies, technologies such as transportation, that's the railroad, and things like standard time. Navigation at sea, you needed very accurate chronometers to do that. Of course, to automated machinery of any kind, to any precision industrial process, including factory discipline. And I think you're familiar with the time and motion studies that were very important among efficiency experts in industrial revolutions. Up until the quartz watch came in commercial use in the 1960s and 70s, the mechanical watch played a major role in timekeeping for industrial purposes, or in general purpose, scientific purposes as well. And at the same time, the watch epitomizes, we're going to see this, the confluence of beauty and technology. It brings fine art into technology in a very special way, as what I'll try to show. I want to particularly focus on the company of Patek Philippe. I'm showing one of their watches here. Why Patek Philippe? Geneva, where it was headquartered, was both the cradle and soon the epicenter of the world watch industry by the middle of the 19th century. It has a fascinating company history. It was founded in 1839 in the middle of the Industrial Revolution in Europe. And more than any watch company I know of, it exemplified a seamless convergence of technology and art. And above that, and this is the nice thing, World's Fairs had a central role in the evolution of that country and in the company's policies. So we'll be able to play that up. Patek, I guess you're all aware, is now seen as a luxury brand. But before 1960, that is before quartz, it was building the most accurate watches in the world. These watches were tested at periodically. Accuracy was so important. Astronomical observatories in Europe tested them for accuracy and precision. Patek was the champion of those things. World's fairs also had awards for accuracy, beauty of watches. In fact, I'm just looking at a statistic here. They ran away with most of the awards at the fairs. Patek was the pioneer of accuracy in the mechanical watch between 1868 and 1960. Patek won fully 50% of the top awards for precision. The rest of the watch companies in the world, there were a lot of them, shared the other 50%. More than that, the company decided, I'll hear about more of that in a second, use World's Fairs as their major advertising strategy. Beauty was also highly favored. The mantra was that a clock's beauty came from within, came from a beautiful movement. That is a precise movement where everything meshed just right. But it also extended to the outside of the watch with some incredible artistic decoration. You're seeing some of that right here in this thing. Let me say something a bit more about the history of the company. These are the two founders. Patek, Antoine Norbert de Patek, was an immigrant from, actually an emigre from Poland. And Jean-Adrien Philippe was an immigrant from France. Now, they met in 1844, before World's Fairs were happening. Patek met him in 1844 at the Paris Industrial Exposition, not a World's Fair, in 1844. And in 1845, Patek patented something that seems very obvious to all of us and very simple, but it was one of these, killer apps. He's the guy that invented and patented the crown winding and setting mechanism. Even my Timex here, even though it's a quartz watch, is a very cheap quartz watch, by the way, has the crown setting mechanism and not for winding. But that basically put Patek to the top of the heap in mechanical watches. That one patent launched this company into the stratosphere. So we got the patent I think it was 1845, and then they're off to the races. I want to say something now about the beauty side of things, the artistic side of things. I'm going to show you a painting here. This is a painting by a renowned landscape artist, a Swiss landscape artist, Alexandra Kalam. And this is a very stirring painting, The Storm, Orage. Now, here's the magic that happens. This painting gets transformed, miniaturized into a watch. This is just a stunning watch to me. They had enamelers. This is all enamel painting you're seeing, and they use other gold techniques and so on. But they took that painting, if you go back and forth. I mean, look at the trees and everything. It's a copy of this painting in miniaturized. I'm going to leave some of these on a little bit longer so you can just sort of take in the beauty of these things. That really struck me. I haven't seen any of these things in person, but I have seen Patek watches. When I went to New York, they had one of their trade shows in New York City several years ago. And it was just phenomenal. And enamelers are still at work in these, in Patek's workshops. So let me say something about Kalam, because this says something about how Patek got into the beauty business on this. Kalam opened his studio in Geneva, Switzerland in 1834, and he attracted students from all over Europe. And one of his students was Antoine Norbert de Patek, who initially aspired to be an artist. I'll show you his picture again here. This is great. I can go back and forth. He's on the left here. He wanted to be an artist, but he eventually went into watchmaking. But his early artistic training really left its mark on the beautiful watches that his company produced, including the ornamentation of this particular piece. He gave the paintings of great masters a prominent place on watch cases via this enamel technique. Patek became known for working with legendary watchmakers, enamel painters, goldsmiths, silversmiths, and others, highly skilled craftsmen in the Jura Mountains near Geneva. That was a fabled place where watchmaking began in Switzerland, and that's where all our Swiss watches originated. I'll give you another example. Now, these are pre-World's Fairs things, but I want to show you the deep roots of this. This is another painting. This one's by Franois Adaire. It's not a painting, it's a lithograph of a Swiss landscape. It's by Lake Geneva in the front, and you see Mont Blanc in the background. What a beautiful area. I've never been there myself, but I hope someday to get there. Now, here's the line of succession. Adaire was a teacher of Alexandra Kalam. And then Patek was in turn a pupil of Kalam. So you can see the line there from going all the way from Adaire, great painter, through Kalam to Antoine Patek. Now, that same painting, I'm going to show you something. I don't know if you can see it, but if you look toward the middle of the lake there, this of Lake Geneva, there is a steamboat. The whole idea of this is to highlight the technological revolution, the Industrial Revolution. The steamboat was very early on one of the landmarks of technology. And there's a nice steamboat. You can see the steam blowing out of the smokestack. And I wish I could blow it up to you more, but I can't. Okay, but there it is. Now, here's another transfer process. This is a miracle to me. This is a lorgnette watch. That is, a watch is embedded in these opera glasses, okay? But on the opposite side of this, of the watch itself, is the transfer of this painting by enamel to the watch itself. Now, here's a mystery to me. Whatever happened to the steamboat? For some reason, it's gone. Maybe they didn't think it was beautiful enough, but it's gone from here. But this is clearly a transfer of that painting. Moving on now, we're going to go now to the period of the first World's Fair. That is the Crystal Palace exhibition in, I'm trying to anyway, 1851, the Great Exhibition in Hyde Park in London. It was opened by, this is the ceremony, Queen Victoria. That's so-called Crystal Palace. That was a structure of cast iron and plate glass that was erected to house the fair. And this is the opening ceremony. And her husband, Prince Albert, was a noted promoter of World's Fairs and for the first World's Fair. Joseph Paxton was the architect, famously the architect of that. Now, at this fair, fully 70 watches were submitted for display by Patek to the first ever World Exposition. Now, from his experience, Patek was quick to realize that exhibiting his process and innovations at these well-attended events not only boosted their sales, but made his company an international brand, which indeed it became. Patek participated in every World's Fair in the second half of the 19th century, and most of them in the 20th century as well. And it received, as I mentioned before, numerous awards that burnished the reputation of Geneva's finest watch company at that time. But here are some of the watches that were at that fair that combine beauty and accuracy. Take it for granted that the watches I'm going to show you are all miraculous instruments of precision. But this one was celebrating, it was sort of reaching out to America with a nice cameo, enameled cameo of our first president, George Washington. I'll let you have a second to look at this. I'm always sort of amazed at these things, these extraordinary renderings of something much larger to, well, they do it in dollar bills, I guess, too, but this is better than a dollar bill. It's actually probably worth about $6 million by now. So take that in, it gets better, folks. This was a watch that appeared at the fair, and it was made for Tiffany's. And this was actually the sort of the launching of a partnership between Patek and Tiffany. I think that's still going on today. So it's a gorgeous thing with these embedded diamonds in it against a blue enamel. There's an enamel background. Evokes a star-studded American flag, each state representing a US state. Well, I'm enough of a nerd that I counted these stars, and there were 32 stars on this watch, but perhaps it was poetic license since there were then only 30 states in the Union, but you know, what's a star to? You can take that in. Now, here's another painting. I don't know the artist. Somebody may know in the audience today, of a watch that was presented at the Crystal Palace. Another enamel painting. And aside from the dogs, look at the marvelous landscape in back of that. These are stunning pieces. This is a pendant watch. I mean, we're a long way from the wristwatch. It was really early 20th century. These are all pendant watches, basically, pocket watches too. Now, and again, this is an homage to the partnership with Tiffany. The previous one, I'm sorry. Okay, now, this is a watch that was presented by Jean-Adrien Philippe himself, the inventor of that crown that I mentioned before, to Queen Victoria at the Crystal Palace. And now you can get a nice close-up of the crown. And the backside you can see with a little adornment on top. The crown is at the top, and the watch used to have a key. These watches no longer had keys. You just simply manipulated the crown to set it by pulling it out, or pushing it in to, or pulling it out to wind it, or pushing it into, you know, one of the two variations to set it and wind it. That killer app that I mentioned to you. Queen Victoria was a frequent visitor to that fair after introducing it, and she was very taken with Patek watches. She owned several herself. She bought these, and hold it a second. She bought all of these here. She bought these these here. They were personally shown to her by Philippe, and these as well. And she acquired another watch for her husband, Prince Albert. I'll give you a second to take it in. I hate to go breeze by these two. It's almost impossible for me to breeze by it because I've always taken with what I see. Now let me move on to another World's Fair with watches. This is the Paris exhibition of 1878. So we're moving from London to Paris, and 27 years later. And one of the artistic features there is a replica. I don't think it's the real thing that actually came to the US for the Statue of Liberty by Bartholdi, the head of the Statue of Liberty. But I want to show you there's always this artistic element to the fairs. And this is the kind of collage I put together for you to show you that not only do you have the art sculpture demonstrated, shown at the fair, but it also shows Alexander Graham Bell's prototype of his telephone. This is very typical. There are lots of other technologies shown at this fair. Again, this is set up to display the prowess of the Patek Philippe company up to that time. This is an interesting watch. It has two dials, one in the front and one in the back, and there I show you the movement. This is one of the most complicated watches ever produced by Patek Philippe up to that time. It has a perpetual calendar. It shows the moon phases. I mean, it's just got all kinds of complications to it. It's just a beautiful piece of work, and gold work is amazing on this thing. And I could just look at the movement itself all day. They're just, works of art in themselves. I'm going to move us forward now to the let's see. Yes, to the 1893 World's Fair, the World's Columbian Exhibition, which maybe most of you are familiar with, in Chicago. This is for the 500th anniversary plus 1 year for Columbus's coming to America. It was delayed by a year from 1892. But we were very lucky to have a catalog from that fair. It's very hard to tell exactly which watches were shown at these fairs, but this catalog lists some 200 watches that were presented at the 1893 World's Fair. Here's Patek Philippe just basically showing off what it could do and taking it to a wider public. And this gives you a sense of how they viewed themselves, Patek Philippe. They participated, it says there, of all the universal exhibitions up to that time. I'll just read this because I think it's a kind of a very interesting statement. Our firm was founded in 1839, and since 1844, we have participated in all the universal exhibitions, obtaining always and everywhere the highest awards. The Grand Prix, 1 gold, 2 silver, and the Legion of Honor, and going to Philippe, Monsieur Philippe, for his invention of the crown. So as I said, there was something like 200 watches in the central showcase for that fair. Here's something else that says something about the machine creation of these watches as well. I'll read this. These movements, though running, have no handmade parts except in the escapement. From 10 lines up to the largest size, all our movements are made mechanically and have the same pointing, whatever be the size or shape, so that the dial of a movement can be adapted to any other movement of the same size. Now, we're not talking about mass production here. We're talking really about machine production to make things very precise. But it's not mass production because a lot of these were embellished with all kinds of things, with gold work, with diamond work, with enameling as well. That's, I think, is an important distinction to keep in mind. I also want to give you their outlook on the relationship of the mechanism to beauty. Beauty is carefully attended to. Like the technical side, the artistic and decorative features of our work is most carefully attended to. The seating of precious stones, enamel painting, engraving, etc., are executed by the most skilled artists, some of whom are working in the factory. It's very important. They had a system, sort of a putting out system, and they would benefit from enamelers in the Jura Valley as well, but they also hired some of them to work in the factory. These were the real stars of their enterprise. Now, I want to show you how watches got into the 20th century. They continued to attend World's Fairs in the 20th century. So I'm going to show you another watch of Patek produced for a World's Fair, and a little trouble getting on. Okay. This is, hold on a second. Yes. This is the Paris International Exposition of 1937. And just in passing, let me point out that what you see are the Champ de Mars for the fair, and right across from each other, you have the Nazi pavilion on the left, and on the right, you have the Soviet pavilion, which the fair's organizers mischievously put right across from each other at that time. And there's a whole story there about how those pavilions were in competition with each other, but that's an aside. But I do want to show you that Patek was in attendance there, and they're keeping up with the times. This is 1937's the Art Deco period. This watch was made in 1936. It was called a World Time watch, or he also called it the watchmaker was Louis Cotier. He made it right at that same time in 1936 for the Paris Fair. He originally called these Heures Internationales, basically international hours or watches, but they followed the fashion of the times. This is clearly an Art Deco watch, and that's what Patek Philippe prided itself in, that it kept up with the times, with the fashions. And I want to say something about this watch very quickly here. the pink 24-hour ring turns counterclockwise every 24 hours, and it shows the 24 time zones for the cities listed on the white outer dial. That is, this is a watch you could use anywhere in the world and calculate the time. The local time is always Paris, and it's fixed. So this is shown at the fair. And I want to point out something else. Later on, Patek Philippe, even after the quartz watch came into existence and made watch accuracy extraordinarily cheap, and made watches in general very cheap to make because of quartz. Patek worked very hard they were very devoted to their makers of their watches and to the skills, especially in the Jura Valley. And they kept the enameling and the goldsmithing and the silversmithing, all of those things of watchmaking alive by creating an economy for them, markets for them. And they still survive today because of Patek's devotion to these people. They could have just let go and gone the way of the quartz watch. Actually, Patek had a role in the creation of the quartz watch, but they decided not to go the rest of the field in Geneva. Quartz watch decimated, maybe more than decimated, the watch industry in Geneva. They could not basically compete with an influx of Japanese quartz watches at that time. So they went out of business. Patek made a fateful move at that time, and they decided they were going to go back to the mechanical movement and stay with these beautiful watches that they have. So that's why we have these gorgeous watches today. Now let me now change gears once again. I want to go now to the Paris. We're out of watches now. We're going to the Paris World's Fair International Exposition of 1900. I love this poster, by the way. Now, this was important for my discussion today because I want to talk about not only the belief in technological and artistic progress going hand in hand, but by the early 20th century, there were naysayers. There were people very concerned that technology was going to corrupt the human spirit or bypass the human spirit. One of those people that wrote beautifully about that is Henry Adams, son and grandson of two presidents, and a historical writer, wrote all kinds of things. And this essay, it's a chapter 25 of his autobiography, which was published in 1918, that is 18 years after the fair itself, but it documents his visit to that fair in 1900. And that chapter is titled The Dynamo and the Virgin, and that may be a familiar sound to you because that is, at least among my tribe, historians of technology, that's a very great essay. But he's questioning the linkages between technology and beauty. Now, he is very taken with the dynamos, hence the title of that chapter. He visited the gallery of the machines. This is the gallery of dynamos at that time. And he was actually escorted around by a favorite secretary of the Smithsonian, Samuel Pierpont Langley, was famous for making a plane that crashed in the Potomac early on, and therefore did not beat the Wright brothers. But he is a physicist and an astronomer, and he walked Adams around the fair. And Adams was just so taken with these incredible machines, some 40, 50 feet tall. And this is the evidence of the electricity revolution at that time, at the turn of the century. And these really impressed. Here's what he wrote. I've got to move my little screen aside here so I can see this quote here to read it to you. He always talks about himself in the third person. As he, that is Henry Adams, grew accustomed to the great gallery of machines, he began to feel the 40-foot dynamos as a moral force, much as the early Christians felt the cross. Before the end, one began to pray to it, he said. And indeed, he did pray to it. Mysterious power, gentle friend, despotic master. tireless force. But he has a caveat. He writes in the Dynamo and the Virgin, the force of the Virgin, that is the Virgin Mary, was still felt at Lourdes and seemed to be as potent as X-rays, which he was shown by the Smithsonian secretary. But in America, neither Venus nor Virgin ever had value as a force, at most as sentiment. No American had ever been truly afraid of either. Well, he's saying here that in contrast to Europeans, Americans just weren't with it. They were so devoted to technology that they really didn't catch the spiritual force of all of that. Okay. So when he talks about the Virgin, he's really talking about, as we saw in the previous slide there, Venus or the Virgin. Now, these images were not at the World's Fair, but Henry Adams was wandering around Paris at the same time looking at museums. We have two works of art from the Louvre, the Venus de Milo on the left, and on the right, you have Da Vinci's famous Virgin of the Rocks. And he felt that Americans had lost their sight of the value of the value of beauty, of art, and the spirit, which he linked all together. And he also links them with a female force, obviously, from what you're seeing here as well. And he's very taken with technology. At the same time, he's worried about it. And my take on this is that he was really wondering at that period, I've written about this, that human spirit is not going to survive the age of machines. And it's something we're still concerned with today with artificial intelligence and computers, all these things that seem to be hindrances to the human spirit and appreciation of art and beauty. So he sounded the alarm in that period. And basically, this is an angst about the machine age, is this arbitrary slide I found of Charlie Chaplin film. That could be a watch mechanism or something else, but there's a lot of anxiety in that period that machines were replacing workers, bringing down the labor costs and hence wages for workers as well, but basically dehumanizing us. And that's what Charles Chaplin is telling us in this. So I think he is a great spokesman, both Chaplin and Henry Adams, for the anxieties of the machine age. So I'm going to now fast forward to the fair in 1964, the 1964-1965 World's Fair. And there it is with its iconic sculpture there, the Unisphere, which I think maybe still is in Flushing Meadows. I'm not sure. Somebody can check me on that as well. But basically, this is a Cold War fair. Have to keep in mind this fair in 1964 was only 2 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. You also have to remember that a few months before JFK was assassinated. These are very fraught times. And the way I see it, and now bear with me here, I'm seeing this as another encounter between the Dynamo and the Virgin, but later on. And to me, it fits because in that period was the first so-called second industrial revolution when Adams was writing. That was the revolution that brought in the airplane, the automobile, automated machinery, new metals, and so on. That was one of the great displacements in society at that time. The fair after the war, after the Second World War, what I'm talking about now, was in a way a reflection of, it's a continuation of that initial revolution. And the post-war industrial revolution was really very powerful when a lot of the wartime technologies were adapted to commercial use. So this was a time of conflict, but also a time of great prosperity for America, and also a boosterism of technologies of all kinds. But what I'm going to focus on is something a little different. I mean, that's me, that's what I do. This was the presentation of Michelangelo's Pietà at the 1964 World's Fair. This was in the Vatican Pavilion, not in the Italian Pavilion. Well, first of all, the Vatican owns this piece. First time it ever got out of the Vatican, and the last time. But it was a Cold War. It was a Cold War fair, but Russia was not there. The Soviet Union was not there. Not because they were having troubles with the United States, but mostly because Robert Moses, who was the president of the fair and the renowned, the famously powerful head of their parks in New York, he violated all the rules set down by the Bureau of International Expositions that regulates fairs. They're in Paris. They said you can't do things, for example, charge fees for charge rental fees for other countries to come in, and he insisted on charging fees. So the BIE, as it's abbreviated, said, please don't urge countries not to show up. Many European countries did not show up. But here we have the Vatican Pavilion. And this is a very stagey thing. It was staged by, in fact, a Broadway designer. It's got these lights around it simulating votive candles. By the way, it's shielded by all kinds of bulletproof glass. They were very afraid something would happen to this treasure. But it was a very spectacular presentation. They called it the Blue Grotto, which you can see why. This was all accepted by Pope John the 23rd, who sent it off to America aboard the Cristoforo Colombo. And on the ship, it was battened down by all sorts of high-tech techniques, just in case something happened to it. They even did I can't say a dry run because it's on the ocean, but they did an experimental run beforehand to see, with a model, full-size model, to see if the Pietà could be damaged by the pitching of the ship and so forth. But they also had things on there that had it battened down in an incredible way, all kinds of technology around it. And in fact, if it went overboard, they had a beacon that was there that would, and a radio signal that would lead people to finding it again, heaven forbid that it gets found. Now, there's the Pietà that you just saw. The other big hit at that fair was the IBM Pavilion, designed by Eero Saarinen. And here it is, and it's called the Egg for, I think, some pretty evident reasons. That's, by the way, a simulation of the IBM Selectric typing ball. If you look up close, those are IBM, that says IBM all the way around. That was a very visited pavilion. And if you went below, you had a simulated forest, and people could encounter little stations for little interactive stations for interacting with computers. And then you could ride a bleachers upstairs into the egg, and you would be presented with a beautiful presentation by Charles and Ray Eames. Just a wonderful thing. You can actually see that online, as a matter of fact, showing technology, American history, and that sort of thing. But the whole intent of that pavilion was to get people used to these big mainframe computers, because that's all there were at that time, these mainframes. There were no personal computers at that time. And they kind of scared people. So they wanted to introduce you to them, if you were a visitor, to the automated kiosks, and you could ask questions of it and think this was a very friendly presence. Well, people weren't really sucked in. The polls show they weren't that happy with this. We have to understand, though, that IBM that time was the biggest computer country in the world. And it became a Cold War symbol right at that time. And that's what made it the biggest computer company. It won, just before the fair, a contract on SAGE, and I won't go over the acronym, but it's basically a government contract with MIT and with MIT as well to set up an early warning system near the North Pole for incoming Soviet missiles, should that ever happen. But that really launched IBM into the very top tier of computer companies worldwide. But basically, this says that IBM is then identified with the Cold War. And people said they kind of viewed the computer there as the big mainframes as a sort of Orwellian things. They were overwhelming and they were dehumanizing. There was a lot of that fear around. And Lewis Mumford, a famous technology critic and historian, wrote that the computer was the bane of our existence. He said it was going to dehumanize all of us in that period. He was a guy who was very pro-technology, but he wrote in that period that this was a very dangerous technology. He was indicative of some of the intellectual response to this at that period. So my conceit here is that we have a confrontation between the computer or the dynamo, if you will, and the Pietà, i.e. the Virgin again. And so basically, I think that Henry Adams was right on the money for all this kind of thing. Now, just to conclude, and I want to look forward here. It was John the 23rd, Pope John the 23rd, that launched the trip for the Pieta to the US. He died, and then Pope Paul VI here greets Kennedy, President Kennedy, but I think that's Dean Rusk in the foreground there, with a model of the Pietà. So it looks like Paul VI was very much on board with the World's Fair, but actually he wasn't. He made a real plea for art and the human spirit. He visited the Vatican Pavilion in New York, and he was openly opposed then to the US war in Vietnam. He blessed the crowd that came and hailed the religious conviction of this great artistic work in Pietà. He said, "Peace and harmony was the theme of the Vatican Pavilion." The quoting is like this: "We feel these same religious convictions can move men in a similar way to peace and harmony among the peoples of the world." Well, fat chance of that, but that's. I want to point something out here by way of conclusion. I don't know if any of you read about this, if you're old enough to remember it. I certainly am. The Pietà was presented in that Blue Grotto in front of a conveyor belt, essentially, a moving sidewalk in front of it, because they were very concerned that the crowds would, would clog up the entrance to the pavilion. So you had to go stand on a moving sidewalk, and you would be, move by this. And this is a very, very strange thing to me, but that's what they did. And it got a lot of press, by the way, at that time. But it made me think, and you have to indulge me here a little bit. Was this maybe a theme ride? And so I'm saying here that art and technology, as we're looking more and more toward the present, was a really kind of hybrid that I don't think we fully understand yet, a hybrid of art and technology. I'm showing you on the left is the other great, exhibit. This was GM Futurama 2. And to the right, you can see a model of a city with its roads and the city of the future. And the people are sort of riding around there on this conveyor. They're looking down and rapt attention to that. So I'm wondering, is the Vatican Pavilion featuring the same thing? Is this a theme ride? Is the Michelangelo been compromised into a theme ride? That same fair, you had the introduction of Disney. Disney was all over this fair. And this is the animatronic Abe. You're seeing him without his clothing on, his hat and his clothes. But we're now seeing the convergence to me of art here in history and technology. And this is the context we're looking at that Pietà in, I think. So maybe there's a new model, maybe there isn't. But fairs are all about the future. So let's look at our future of fairs. And I'm wondering here whether the fairs are going to go this direction. There's going to be augmented reality. That should be AR, and virtual reality. And here's a projection of the Louvre at the Mona Lisa, And it says, I don't show the legend by it, that she is emerging from the bulletproof glass in front of you and confronting you directly. I haven't gone to any World's Fair since Milan in 2015, not 1915, 2015. And I didn't see any signs of AR and VR for that fair. But I did go to a Patek exhibit in New York City, a trade show several years ago, and they had some VR, virtual reality. We could walk into a watch that was bigger than you are, and you could actually walk around all those little pieces all meshing together beautifully. So my question is this going to be the future of our World's Fairs? And I'll leave you that to speculate on. Thank you very much for your time.
Perfect. Yeah. Wonderful. Wow. I have so many notes, but other people have questions, so I have to ask their questions because that's only fair. But everyone was absolutely floored by how beautiful those watches are in the chat. So thank you for showing us all those great images. I was just thinking with that last slide with the Mona Lisa about the Van Gogh exhibits that are sweeping everywhere.
Immersive Van Gogh.
Immersive Van Gogh. Yeah, it does seem like that's got to be coming for these types of experiences.
I was torn because when I was moving along through the watches, I knew I had to be, swift in doing this, but I just couldn't get myself to. I can't stop looking at them. Someday I won't own one.
We appreciated it. I do have a couple of questions. We are at 6:30, so some people might have to sign off, which is fine, but we'll ask certainly the questions that came up during your talk, which are, I'm thinking about how our theme is about invention and innovation. And it is really interesting to think about being rewarded for being innovative and being an innovator. And one of the questions is, what are the benefits? Is it notoriety or monetary? What were the benefits for artists and inventors whose work are displayed at World's Fairs?
Well, having one of the biggest stages of the world for many, many years to show off your skills. Fairs may not be quite as elaborate now as they were in that respect, in terms of art presentations. And I think they may be going virtual sooner rather than later on these things. But Patek understood this, Antoine Patek understood this. He knew this was his main marketing thing. And he knew that people wanted to showcase their work there. And the artists in the same way. This is a wonderful opportunity to be there. You got a lot of eyes, as they say these days, on these things. So I think the incentive is it's great to get prizes as well. Mm-hmm. Prizes were given out liberally at these fairs, but I think it's mostly just having the eyes of the world on you.
Yeah, right. And especially in the past, now we can market, we're being marketed to all day, every day, all the time. So having that type of marketing experience. Okay. I get really into it. I want to analyze and have a back and forth, but I gotta be nice to these people and ask their questions.
we can do it offline.
Right. It says, thank you for the point about the Pieta as a theme ride. It brings to mind how many people and cultures were also displayed as spectacles at World's Fairs. Do you think this is due to the fair format and how it blends education and entertainment? That's Absolutely. A great question.
Absolutely the case. And that's the real draw of fairs, that they're able to put the two together. And in contrast to some museums, I think the fairs are, willing to go the entertainment route. I think that's a very big deal. To me, sometimes that gets in the way of things. They can, you sort of look, it's not entertainment really, but you go, the Mona Lisa is essentially an entertainment piece at the Louvre these days. Huge crowds, you can't have a chance of seeing it anymore. And people ignore all the other Da Vinci's that are around it there. So I think it's really basically a piece of entertainment. By the way, I'm the only person that I know of in the world that calls the Pietà a theme ride. I should tell you something. They did all this care about preserving it. Then it gets back to the Vatican, and it got attacked by a mad Hungarian with a sledgehammer. A hammer, and very badly damaged. They put it back together again. So it comes here. Nothing happened to it in America or before. And suddenly it goes back home to the Vatican and it gets damaged.
Oh boy, now that you say that, I remember learning about that in art history classes. But that is really ironic that it doesn't, yeah, that's very ironic. The theme ride, it made me think of the Jurassic Park movie where they get to the island and they get strapped in and that's all I could picture while you're talking about the Pieta.
Yeah.
Talking about innovation.
I hope I haven't ruined it for you.
No, I love it. It's really funny. That's great. Well, now everybody who's been, all 30 of us that were on this talk tonight will be referring to it as a theme ride as well.
You have to pay me a dime for every time you say it.
Yeah, there you go. Oh boy. Well, I would love to have more questions, but this might end up being our last one for today, which I believe I know the answer to this, but just for those who might not, did the entrepreneurs and inventors and scientists and artists, did they create work, solely for World's Fair exhibitions, or did they submit work that they were already working on?
There was submitted work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you had the case of a painting that's unusual, a painting that was actually created for the fair. But this is all submitted work. Now, they were very aware when they had the fairs that you better get out your latest products before the fair were shown there, but those were sold, and they eventually ended up in consumers' hands, but not just for the fair. But it's your great stage. You might as well show your best side, best foot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I had not really ever learned that context of them growing out of trade shows, but it makes so much sense. It's basically that trade show plus the education plus the entertainment.
Yeah, it's an absolute continuity of those.
Yeah,
they weren't invented out of whole cloth. Lots of
Excellent. That's exciting. And I had a thought too, in one of your quotes, there was that interesting, you talked about selling the Industrial Revolution. And there was one of the quotes that said that there were no handmade parts in the watch and that it was all made by machine. And at first I was thinking like, well, when did we go from, that idea of selling that machine made to this fascination that we have with handmade? But really there's always been the tension between the two because you have the arts and crafts movement at the same time as those early World's Fairs. So we've always been negotiating that anxiety around technology.
You wanted to be with it at that time. You had to show, we're big on machines. And they actually had watches. I've seen watches by Patek that look like machines. I mean, they sort of replicate they just go, I've seen them in books. They just look exactly like machines, big machines. So it's part of the ethos of the time. And I wanted to say that the fairs do reflect the styles of the time, the ethos of any time. At the same time, they showcase them, so they foster something. So that's been my take on World's Fairs.
Right.
We do both.
I am holding everyone hostage here, but my last question before I let everyone go, do you see any brands that are kind of following in those footsteps of prioritizing both the technology and the artistry, the beauty at the same time? Are there any brands that you see right now that are prioritizing that?
Patek, first of all, the best-selling watch in the world is this Apple Watch, by the way.
It's not beautiful. I don't have mine on right now, but it's not very pretty.
Rolex has some aspirations to that, but Rolex watches are made by robots, essentially, now. Just lines of robots that they do it in there and present it. But that was I lost the train of thought now. Were you?
Yeah, even outside of watches, are there brands that are prioritizing the innovation and the art, together in the same way?
I think there's more attention to it these days. Patek is doing it all the time now. It's very much central to it. But I would say, I'm not a watch collector, by the way, at all. I'm not a watch connoisseur or aficionado. I just know what I like when I see it, that kind of thing. But I think there are any number of things that value. Industrial design is just an expression of that whole thing. And look at railroads and big technologies. There's a lot of that. I think industrial design is the real expression of that spirit of design. You see that all over the place these days. So it's not. I wouldn't call the people at Patek industrial designers. That's not it. They're real craftsmen of a different sort. Industrial design is kind of in the same ballpark, maybe for that.
Mm.
I mean, every company knows you got to do it for, just human reasons, but they understand the point of beauty. I don't buy things that aren't nice looking. You have to.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating.
I
Okay.
don't know about steam engines anymore. But I mean, automobiles. Think about automobiles. I mean, that's all about design.
I was thinking about Tesla and that innovation and that.
I don't like the look of Tesla,
but it's a look, but
that's
it's
a look.
whether you like it or not, it's very intentional.
That's just me. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's something to do with streamlining, they say, but say that about my Prius too. So.
Yes. Well, I'm going to stop holding everyone hostage, even though I'd love to ask more questions. So thank you so much for being with us, Art. Everyone is saying thank you in the chat. It was a really fascinating presentation, and we all had a really lovely time together. So thank you so much.
If you send my email around, I'm happy to respond to anything.
Perfect. And next time that you are able to come up and visit, normally when we're doing in-person lectures, we treat our speaker to dinner. So we owe you a dinner. So just let us know when you get here.
Sure. I hope to get up this summer if things have gotten a little safer to get up to Binghamton anyway. So
hopefully, well, let us know.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Take care. Thanks, everyone. Night.